Now on the APEC VIP hotline, cutting-edge training for the serious athlete, apecgo.com. The results show when the athletes take the field. We normally talk to Travis Stewart, the managing editor of Dave Campbell's Texas Football, but the guy that writes everything, who really does all the heavy lifting, is Greg Tepper. How you doing, Greg?
I'm doing fine, but don't let Travis hear that.
I promise. He never listens to the show. Don't worry about a thing. It's not a problem. No, actually, we were looking at the Dave Campbell's Texas Football, texasfootball.com website, and you had a very good article today concerning some legislation that's been proposed that would limit the amount of hitting in high school football during the week. So tell me a little bit specifically about the legislation, first of all.
Well, it's been proposed by Representative Eddie Lucio III. He's a Democrat from down in Brownsville, and he has a bit of a history of filing bills that have to do with high school football. Back last year, he passed what I thought was a very good bill that strengthened the regulations about the age and the condition of football helmets that you can use, and after a certain amount of time, you just have to throw them out and get new ones. I thought that was a great bill. And then he's had another one that establishes kind of baseline testing for concussions so that doctors know what to compare it to. But this latest one that he's pushed through, House Bill 887, it proposes a limit of just one full contact practice per week for high schools and middle schools, and that's during the season. So, if John Tyler's playing on Friday night, they can pick one time during the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, to actually have full contact practice. And it's gotten a little bit of pub here and there, and generally, I think that my view, which is that it's going to do a little more harm than good, is kind of winning the debate now.
Why do you think it'll do more harm than good?
Well, I understand what Representative Lucio is concerned about. He's concerned about the cumulative effect of these hits, which is absolutely a concern. You look at what the NFL is trying to do to limit concussions. It's not just the big hits; it's the over and over little hits. So he's saying, let's have fewer little hits that will ultimately end in healthier kids, which I understand where he's coming from. But at the same time, you talk to any coach, he will tell you that the most important thing for young kids to learn is how to hit. Mm-hmm. We've talked, you look at things that the NFL and college and high school have put in to reflect, to try to prevent these big hits, these helmet-to-helmet hits, these hits low in the knee area, or things that are trying to give people concussions. If you don't teach a kid how to hit, then he's going to go out there and do it dangerously. And it's something that we've always really kind of tried to point out in our magazine. Actually, in our winter edition of Dave Campbell's Texas Football, we've got a photo at the beginning of a guy making a tackle, and in the cut line we even say he did a couple of things right here. First of all, he kept his head up, and that's the kind of thing that you need to teach these kids, because otherwise, I understand that he's trying to go for safety, but if you limit the number of little hits, but you replace those with bigger unsafe hits, that's kind of, a zero-sum game.
All right. Now, the cynic would say that this is just political posturing.
Yeah, and I, generally politics bores me. That's why I write about football. But I do wonder if there's a little bit of posturing here. Representative Lucio does have a history, though, of trying to make the game safer. As I mentioned, I think the two bills that he's produced in the past, HB 68, which was the baseline testing for concussions, and HB 675 last year, which strengthened the regulations about football helmets. I think those are good. So, I think that this is just an area of interest for Representative Lucio. I haven't talked to him, admittedly. I'll try to put in a phone call to him. But, I think that ultimately the cynic would say there's some posturing, but I think this is a guy who generally does care about regulating the game and making it safer, which is something that I think we all want. I just don't think this is going about it in the right way.
Greg Tepper from Dave Campbell's Texas Football and texasfootball.com on Bryan Houston Sports Radio Live on 99.3 Talk FM. Now, one of the things that one of my Facebook commenters had to say about it was, are they also going to regulate practices to be held between 3 and 5 a.m. so kids don't have to deal with the Texas heat? That would, to me, would make more sense than this thing about the concussions.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And one of the things, I have kind of drawn the ire of the football purists in the past. I wrote an article last year or maybe the year before that I think the 2-day should be abolished. I think that it's an archaic and dangerous practice. You're seeing kids, unfortunately drop dead at games or at practices, and that should be I really do think that should be outlawed. So I'm a guy who's in favor of safety. In fact, some would say that I'm far too in favor of safety over the game. But I do think that when you look at what this would be replacing a bunch of little hits with potentially dangerous big hits. I just don't think that that's a good trade-off. I don't think that's ultimately going to make the game safer.
The other thing, too, I've done high school football games for many, many, many years, and it's very rare that I've seen the kill shot, helmet-to-helmet hits that you see in college and pro ball. Is this maybe just an overreaction of what we see on television on Saturdays and Sundays, and the problem's just not that big in high school?
I think so. I think that, as you go up the ladder from middle school to high school to college to pro, the game does get faster. It does, and as a result, it does get more vicious. And I think that the rules that they've put in place, things like, making it a penalty for helmet to helmet, telling people to lower their target area to the chest as opposed to the head, I think these are good things. But I do think that, you mentioned it, the big hit, the real one that gets everybody on their feet and going ooh and ah, that is pretty rare in high school football. They do happen, and I think they should be regulated and penalized and all that fun stuff, and we should teach kids how to do it. But that's exactly gets back to my point, which is we need to teach kids how to hit safely, where to target, where to hit them, where to do it safely, so that when they do get into the game, they know it. And unfortunately, for better or for worse, the best way to do that is to just do it in practice.
All right, so let's move on to another article that you wrote, and it had to do with recruiting and some of the school's best recruits. And you have one of the Lufkin kids, an East Texas player with the biggest early impact. It's SMU's Lufkin wide receiver, Jabryce Taylor. Tell me what you know about him.
Well, Jabryce Taylor, I think, is a superstar in waiting. I mean, I think that he's a bit of a steal for SMU here. He's got great size at about 6'2", 6'1", 6'2", and he can fly and has two of the softest hands that I've seen in a long time. He's a guy that seems very well suited for June Jones's run and shoot, and that's why I think that he's a guy who could have a real early impact for the Ponies, and I think that anybody who has to cover Jabryce during the season will take my side on this. He is pretty unstoppable once he gets into his route, and he's a little raw. I do want to see him kind of tighten up his route running a bit, but at the same time, I think he's got all the physical tools to be the next big June Jones wide receiver.
And one of the big steals, having seen this kid in person, and I still think he's the most disruptive player I've seen all year long, was Tyus Bowser from John Tyler going to Houston after decommitting to Oklahoma State, largely because he wants to play basketball. Yeah,
I think it's appropriate that his last name shares it with the Mario villain, because you do not want to see him at the other end of the bridge. I look at this, Tyus Bowser, you hit the nail on the head. The word is disruptive. He will get in there, and he may not make the tackle every time, but he is going to shift the play to a place that he wants it to go. He's going to push around those offensive linemen with his exceptional speed. He's going to make them work. I think he is a huge steal for Houston. I think that was a big get for the Cougs, and I think you're going to see his name in the box scores sooner as opposed to later.
It's funny because I saw Isaiah Golden at Carthage, who's going to Texas A&M, and is arguably one of the top defensive linemen in the country. And Bowser, to me, is way more disruptive than Golden is, and Golden's a beast. There's no question about it. But Bowser, for his size, he is the guy. He's unblockable.
That's exactly it. It's pound. When you go pound for pound, you might go with Tyus Bowser. Just because of his speed and the way that he can get around the edge and get to the quarterback. I mean, in the playoffs, he was darn near unblockable. He was pretty much untouchable in the playoffs. Isaiah Golden, I think you hit the nail on the head. When you look at his size, that's what gives him that sort of edge and what made him a real blue chip recruit. He's big, he sits down in the middle, and he can really, gum up the line and make sure that nobody gets there. But as far as a pass rusher is concerned, as far as really making the tackles work, I think Tyus Bowser is one of the very best in the state.
We also have noticed around here, and I know that you have as well, that recruiting can be a very inexact science, and you got some really, really good players who ended up going to FCS schools. One of them you mentioned was Kilgore linebacker A.J. Davis, and we've seen schools miss on a lot of players. Texas is kind of having to deal with that right now, and you're wondering how a kid like A.J. Davis slips through the cracks and ends up at a place like Sam Houston State. And no offense to Sam Houston State, very good football program, but you wonder why that kid's not playing Division I football someplace.
I was stunned. I thought that he was a big time. I thought he was an FBS talent, and as you mentioned, that's no offense to Sam Houston State, who's obviously building something, but the way that he dominated out there for Kilgore, for what was a fantastic Kilgore defense, I'm pretty amazed. And you look at what Sam Houston State did. They made a bit of an impact in East Texas, also picking up DeMontre Lewis, the big defensive end out of Lufkin. That's the thing, is that I think there's less of the gap between the FBS and the FCS recruiting, I think, is narrowing a bit. When you look at guys like A.J. Davis dropping down into FCS, you start to realize, okay, maybe they can get the big kids as well. And even look at what Lamar did. Lamar was able to pull in Longview running back Torrey White, who if you watch him, he is an FBS talent. Maybe a little undersized to bulk up a bit, but he is a player that can play on Saturdays on television. It's going to be interesting to see how these kids shake out and if they do end up at a bigger program down the road.
Another kid, Greg, and you've mentioned this because you guys had him as the Defensive Player of the Year as a junior, and that was Longview's DeMarcus Lathan. This guy, 5'9" and 190, I grant that that's very small for a linebacker, but don't you think that guy could have been moved to a safety position or something like that? And he ends up at Tarleton State, and I mean, he's productive on the highest level in Texas football. And again, the Defensive Player of the Year, that smells Division I to me.
I think you're exactly right. I think that this was just a matter of a lot of people getting scared because of his size. You mentioned that he's a little undersized for a linebacker, but I think that he's a guy who's got the talent. He's got the football IQ. That's what made him such a special player at Longview, was that he had the football IQ. He knew where to be, and he was able to get sideline to sideline. And that's something that is, I think, is a bit of a commodity and a bit of a lost commodity now, is the ability for linebackers to get left and right all the way sideline to sideline. That's something that Lathan can do, and he can also stuff up the middle. I thought Tarleton State got an absolute steal there. I'm pretty surprised that he ended up falling down to Tarleton State, but everyone's loss is the Texans game.
Yeah, no question. All right, this is where our guys with Travis will start talking about all the things you guys have got going on. You got something real special going on with Texas football right now with a digital version now.
Yeah, it's funny. We've been around for 53 years, so when something that old comes out with something new, it's pretty noteworthy. But we have launched our first, coming out on Friday, our first digital-only magazine. It's going to be a signing day special edition, all about recruiting. We're going through every one of the FBS schools. They each have a page in there breaking down their class. We're going through we're ranking the FCS and Division II classes. We're talking about all the kids from Texas who went out of state. It's really, really amazing. We've also got what I think is a pretty cool feature. I wrote it, so I guess I have to say it's a pretty cool feature about the recent changes in the NCAA recruiting laws. I understand you and Travis talked about it recently.
Right.
Just the texting and the recruiting coordinators and what it's all going to mean. We got some interesting insights from Randy Rogers, our recruiting analyst, as well as Cedar Hill coach Joey McGuire and Rice coach David Bailiff. So definitely going to want to check that out. It will be available in our app, which you can download for your iPhone, iPad, Kindle Fire, or your Android device. But right now, I would just log on to texasfootball.com/digital. That'll take you to where you need to go.
Perfect. And by the way, talking about that recruiting and all the new propositions, all the new rules, the Big Ten's already whining about it. So just throwing that out there.
If the Big Ten's going to be whining about anything, you need to be whining about all these fast Texas kids who are going up there, because they're going to make them all look very, very slow. Guys like the Soto running back Dontre Wilson, I think, could be a superstar up there.
I think you're right. I think you're right. Greg, thanks very much for coming on with us today, man. Good stuff.
Absolutely.
All right, Greg Tepper, the associate editor of Dave Campbell's Texas Football and TexasFootball.com on Bryan Houston Sports Radio Live on 99.3 Talk FM.